Hello, this is Jennifer Briney.
And this is GaryLeland, and you're listening to episode 115 of the Crypto Cousins podcast.
Feed your interest in Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies by joining Hall of Fame podcaster GaryLeland on the Crypto Cousins podcast. And remember, we are all cousins in the world of crypto. This week's price of Bitcoin.
$8,310. That's up $107 or 1.3% over the past 7 days.
Howdy, howdy, howdy. Welcome to the show. Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
You know, we've met a couple times, but this, what was it, in August last year, we were in Orlando and we talked quite a bit. And we started talking about your show, and I was like, Bitcoin people would love to hear this information.
Well, I certainly hope so.
We'll find out. But the other day, I was listening to your podcast, which I never listened to. And that's not saying anything about the quality of your podcast, which is fantastic. I just consume mostly crypto stuff. But for some reason, I got on your podcast, and you were talking about the Fed. And for those who don't know, Jennifer does the Congressional Dish. Real quick, why don't you tell people a short bio of who you are and about your podcast real quick?
Sure. I've been doing Congressional Dish about 7 years now, and it was basically I wanted to know what was going on in Congress. I view Congress as our branch of government, and yet I knew very little about it. So I started out by reading all of the bills that passed the House of Representatives, which I don't do anymore because it's literally impossible. But through that experiment, I've learned a lot about Congress, and I now see Congress as my window to the world. And so I really am looking for all those stories that should be headline news, but aren't, because they're doing a lot of things that affect all of us, especially financially, the way that they're changing the laws. And so I just want to know what they're doing and how it affects me. And so my podcast is from the perspective of a taxpayer who hates pretty much all political parties. And I just want to know what they're doing to me and in my name. And so, the episode that you heard was the Federal Reserve, because it was another one of those situations where it was like, I feel like the Federal Reserve is important and I should understand what it is. And so I took about a month and learned about it, and then did an episode explaining to my fellow peasants, as I like to say, what the Federal Reserve actually is. And so that's the episode you landed on.
And like I said, I don't know what made me come to your podcast today. It was so weird. And I came to the podcast. You must have posted something, and I saw the Fed or news, and I came and I listened to it. And actually, and I never do this because I listen to so many podcasts, and in your podcast was about an hour, I think, maybe. When I got home, I went back to the beginning and listened to the whole thing again. So I don't know why. So you got two downloads from me that day.
It's funny with that episode, you're not the only one who's done that. There's a lot of people that re-listen to that episode. There's a lot in it.
Yeah, and I recommend highly to anyone, if you're not familiar with this podcast, wherever you're listening to this, just search Congressional Dish, and it's going to be there. And find this Fed episode, which is, what was this, last week's show? I mean, it's within...
it was episode 201.
Okay, find that show and listen to it if you want to know something about the Fed, but hopefully you'll know a lot about the Fed when we get through here. And one of the things I found interesting that you talked about, there was a lot of things, but I'm going to break it down into a couple of sections. Number one, which I didn't know, the Fed as we know it today, if I'm correct, and I listened twice, so I should be, you said was the third evolution of the Fed that had been shut down twice before. Is that right?
It was the fourth, actually. So it's, the fourth and only successful central bank that they've set up in the United States. Because the first one, they didn't name it really. It was only around for an hour. It was before the Constitution was even created. And it really didn't catch on outside of Philadelphia because they were issuing paper money that wasn't tied to anything. It wasn't tied to any metals. And so that was the first failure. But then they had the first Bank of the United States, which was actually the second attempt at the central bank. So yeah, they've tried this a few times. President Andrew Jackson, actually, that was his central issue, was to stop the central bank from existing, and he actually succeeded. So that was how our third one died. And so I guess I never realized how controversial central banks were. I mean, in our era, we just don't even think about it. We think it's just a part of our government is what it is, but that's actually not the case. They're very controversial and have been controversial for hundreds of years.
Well, I didn't know they'd been controversial so long. That's what got me. You know, I knew they were now, because Ron Paul, man, he's always on them and has been for a long time. But when I heard that Andrew Jackson had shut him down, there have been other ones that have been shut down. I was going, oh my gosh, this has not been good news. No one's like this for a long time, but they keep coming back. How'd the one today that we know of today come back? If Andrew Jackson shut it down, I mean, he was like, what, the 13th president? I mean, that was a long time ago. How'd this one get started?
Well, this one is just a scandal and a half. They got very smart because basically the Federal Reserve System was, and I know how extreme this sounds, but it was essentially the richest banking families, not only in the United States, but also in Europe, getting together to control the currency of the United States. And so this was basically a banking cartel. There were 6 people representing the biggest banks in the country and in Europe that got together, and they had a secret meeting on Jekyll Island. And this is an island that's right off the coast of, I believe it's Georgia. And at the time, the island was owned by JP Morgan and some of his business partners, so they knew that they can control access. And it was so secret that these men wouldn't even use each other's last names. They had a whole new staff brought in for the meeting so that they couldn't be recognized, so that the papers couldn't talk about the fact that they were together plotting this new central banking system, because they, after the fact, obviously, after they got it into law, but they said that it had, the Congress found out that it was written, essentially, the Federal Reserve Act, by these 6 people, it never would have made it through. It would have been very clear that it was a private banking cartel that was creating a structure to give them control of our currency. And so they essentially wrote the bill on Jekyll Island, and there were a couple versions of it. The first one failed because Senator Nelson Aldrich, who was basically the big business senator and everybody knew it, he just had to put his name on it, and so it failed because it gave away the game. But I call these types of bills that just keep coming back zombie bills. And so a zombie version of the Aldrich bill eventually did become the Federal Reserve Act. It was signed into law in 1913. It was very controversial, and even the way it was passed, it's a strategy that we still see happening until this day, where they take very controversial things and push them into law right before Christmas. And so this was a vote that really wasn't debated the way that it should be, because these senators, in a time when, jumbo jets weren't flying people as fast as they can go now, these men and women in Congress were trying to get home for Christmas. And so they didn't really debate it. It became law. And here we are over 100 years later with a fiat currency, which they promised us would never happen. That was one of the lies back then. But
go into that real quick.
Sure. Yeah. So one of the promises that was made when this became law is that our money would always be tied to something with intrinsic value. And always. Yes, that was a promise. It was clear as day that was something that Congress expected when the Federal Reserve Act became law. Because basically the way that it should work is that we should be able to go to the bank and get something of actual value in return for our paper money. So the paper money was always just meant to be receipts, like receipts and so you could go and get your $500 worth of coins, and that is what the paper money represented.
Paper money used to say silver certificates on it. This bill's worth silver.
Exactly. And now we have Federal Reserve notes, which are very, very different. They're not tied to anything. And that became official in 1971 when our money was officially untied from gold. And so now there's no intrinsic value to our currency, which is how it's able to be manipulated. And the way that affects us as tax-paying peasants is that we keep seeing our prices rising, but that's called inflation. And so what happens is we put our money in our checking account, but our cost of living keeps going up and up and up. And so it's basically a sneaky tax. And the way that this is happening is that the Federal Reserve is just constantly expanding our money supply. They're manipulating our money supply. So while we blame companies and merchants and those that are raising our prices, we don't seem to realize that the prices are raising because the value of our money is going down. And that's the big trick, that you have these bankers that are in control and able to inflate our currency as they see fit. And that's the results to every one of us. It's our bank accounts going down. And the government's involved in this too. That's why we're able to have giant tax cuts become law while our spending constantly increases, because it's also the politicians in government that benefit from this system, because they can spend and spend and spend, not by taxing the citizens, but by having the Federal Reserve print money, essentially.
You covered a lot of stuff here already. We need to break down a little bit of this. First of all, that's okay. That's okay. That's exactly what I asked you to do. So you're doing perfect. First of all, let's go back to the sneakiness. You didn't realize how sneaky they were.
Yeah.
Remember that? What is that movie where he goes, "I am very, very sneaky," But when they snuck this in there, and there's European bankers in there as well. I've always personally thought it was all American banks.
Me too.
I didn't know there were European banks involved in this. Now, during the quantitative easing that happened in 2009 or 8 or whatever.
It went on for a decade.
Yeah.
So it started in 2008, but this went on for a decade.
Well, we gave a lot of money to European banks. So
Yes,
do you think
we
that's
did.
by design, since people who own the Fed are in Europe banks?
Oh, I know it is. I have no doubt it is, because what the Federal Reserve is
why
one.
in the world are we giving money to Europe?
Well, it's because all the central banks are connected. They're connected through what I've nicknamed the World Trade System. It's the World Trade Organization, World Bank. But we have this global system that's being created. And right now, the Federal Reserve is the biggest bank, because the global currency that's currently being used is the US dollar. Now, they want to change that. They want to change that to something that's also a fiat currency called SDRs. But that hasn't happened yet. So because the dollar.
What does that stand for? SDRs.
I believe it's special drawing rights. I think that's what the S is.
I haven't heard that term.
Yeah, so this is a creation of the International Monetary Fund, World Trade Organization type of organization, and it's basically a promise that the governments that are involved will tax their citizens for the actual money if need be. And so I actually bought a plane ticket yesterday. I'm going to Amsterdam, and it tells you how much certain things are worth in SDRs. So if you say SDR in Europe, they already know exactly what that is. But here in America, we don't have these conversations. And so we're not aware that there is a global currency that's being created, also fiat money.
So they already talk values in Europe, you're saying, in the SDR.
Oh, yes.
Yes. Okay. That shows how ignorant we are, because we're watching TV shows about funny things all the time, about stupid things.
Yeah, but where are we supposed to get this information? I mean, that's why I started my podcast, is that I'm so frustrated that this should be what is discussed every day on the news, but our news has been bought by the same corporations that benefit from the system that's being created. And so they don't want us to think about what our money is and what the SDR is. Like, the less we know, the easier it is to keep getting away with it, essentially. We don't understand that our dollar, being the reserve world currency at this moment, gives us a unique position of power, and it makes our central bank, it makes the Federal Reserve, the central bank of all the central banks. And so what happened, and it was also a factor of our Federal Reserve, which is run by bankers, is also policing our bankers, which is why 2008 happened, is because we allowed bankers to essentially police themselves, and they went wild. And it crashed the entire world's economy. So that was another reason where our central bank had to go in and bail out all of these other countries who got caught up in a scandal that they didn't create. Like, they weren't selling houses or issuing mortgages to anybody with a pulse and then repackaging those and selling them to suckers. It was our country that did that. And so our central bank is, in very real ways, propping up the financial system of the entire world. So it's not just the United States this is happening in. This is something that it's a global phenomenon of fiat currencies. And yeah, in 2008 and many years after, our central bank was printing US dollars, which obviously caused inflation and our cost of living to rise, and was handing them out around the world.
Well, to get on that subject now, we just covered how the US dollar is no longer backed by anything as of 70s when Nixon was in, and it's just a fiat currency. Does it say anywhere on the dollar that this is a private company or anything? Because I've never seen it. It kind of looks like it's a government money to me, but you're telling me it's a private entity that's printing this money.
Well, it's semi-private. That's what's so tricky about it. It's a hybrid, weird system. But on our money, they designed it so it would look like government. In fact, they designed the Federal Reserve so it would look like government. The word federal.
Yeah, that's a pretty sneaky name. That's very, very sneaky. I didn't realize how sneaky they were.
It is. And before we get into the way the dollar is designed, I do just want to make that part clear. Like, is it private? Is it public? The way that it's government is that the ultimate control of the Federal Reserve is in the Board of Governors, which is appointed by the President of the United States. So right now there are 5 people on the Board of Governors. 4 out of the 5 of them are bankers. So it is banker controlled, but that is the one way that our government is involved.
This one person, what is this person's job? This one person that the president picks?
Well, so there's supposed to be 7 of them. Right now we only have 5. And then they pick who's the chairman of the board.
Okay.
And so right now we have Jerome Powell. And even though he was appointed by the president, he wasn't necessarily made the chairman by the president. That was the choice of the private bankers.
So the president could point someone and they go, oh, we don't like this guy's pick. He's going to be down at the bottom of the totem pole.
Yeah. And the other directors are the ones that get to choose who's in charge of the whole thing. And then when it comes down, like another part of the trick was there are 12 regional banks, but those directors are picked by member banks. So, I mean, it is banker controlled. And the fact that this is the organization that does the supervision of our banking system, I mean, that's where we really are.
Who are some of these? You said there's 6 big banks, right? Well, you said 7 people, so I figured one person from each bank. Is that wrong?
No, it's not like that. And off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly where they came from. I do have that information in the episode, but I just looked at their LinkedIn. It's the only reason I'm on LinkedIn is to look up stuff like this. But all of them 4 out of the 5 came from the banking industry, and then one person out of the 5 was an economics professor. If you go back in history and you can look at, especially the chairman of the Federal Reserve, I mean, all of them came from some of the largest banks in the world. So
what are some of the banks that are involved in the Fed?
Oh, God.
The big ones, I guess, or what banks? I guess the same banks that started it on Jekyll Island are still in it. They aren't going to drop out.
Absolutely. So JP Morgan Chase is all up in this. And back in the beginning, one of the 6 bankers that went to Jekyll Island was City National Bank. And so they were just advertising at me on Facebook. So they're still around. You've got Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs. I mean, there's a joke apparently. So I read a book called, what was it called? It was written by Naomi Prinz. But she was an insider in the Federal Reserve for 10 years. And apparently they have a joke where they call it government Sachs at the Federal Reserve because so many people from Goldman Sachs, it's their strategy to have people from Goldman Sachs go into both the government and the Federal Reserve. And Goldman Sachs has done quite well in the United States government. So they're part of this. And the way you can really tell that this is a system that functions by and for the bankers is after 2008, after their reckless gambling crashed the world economy, these big banks only got bigger. So these big banks were not only helped in gobbling up smaller banks, but they were directed to do it by the Federal Reserve and actually got loans to buy the smaller banks. So, we have this buzz phrase, the too big to fail banks. They just got bigger and bigger. And so if we had a true regulatory system, that would not be allowed to happen. But the Federal Reserve System, this is who they serve. And
I found something you said interesting on your show is we bailed them out and gave them money, taxpayers, and some of them left their money on deposit with the Federal Reserve.
Yeah.
And then we paid them interest on the money that was our money.
Yes. They get interest on the money. If they park it in the Federal Reserve, they were getting interest. So when we think about the bailout money, the banks were able to put it in the Federal Reserve, sit on it, and collect interest for themselves.
And they didn't even have anything to do with making the money. They were given the money to begin with. Now I'm looking at a $10 bill right now, and on the $10 bill we have Hamilton, who was in favor of a federal bank, if I'm correct.
Which is appropriate, I guess.
Yeah, I guess. I'm surprised he's not on like the 100. But maybe there wasn't 100 back then. That would be a lot of money back in the 1700s.
Yeah, I don't know.
And on the back of it, though, is the Treasury. It shows the U.S. Treasury. And then when I go to the front, it says it has a signature of the treasurer. So how is the Treasury involved with the Fed? Or is that a stupid question?
I don't think it's a stupid question, but the Constitution says that the money supply is just supposed to be guaranteed by the Treasury. So basically, like if you think about an economy that makes sense, that has money that it can be exchanged for metals, the government's function in all of that should be making sure that A, the metals are real, so people aren't getting counterfeit gold in return for their receipt money, and to measure the weights so that if you're getting, a half a pound of gold or whatever, that's the true weight of it. That's supposed to be the function, and that's supposed to be what the Treasury does. The coup is basically when the Federal Reserve got the power to control our money supply. But that's part of the trick. That's the fact that they have the treasurer and the Treasury Secretary sign our dollar bills. It really does make it seem like that money comes from the Treasury when it really doesn't. It's a Federal Reserve note. It's issued by the Federal Reserve.
It says it at the top, Federal Reserve note in real big writing. It's right there.
Yeah. And
right
so
there, hidden in plain sight.
Exactly. So it's like they kind of tell you what it is, but just the fact that it's named federal, they have the treasurer sign it, it has the seal of the United States. The money makes you think. Exactly. It says all that stuff. It says United States of America, especially on the back. There's nothing there that says that it's connected to the Federal Reserve. So that's a brilliant design because most of us have never questioned it. But if you really look at that dollar, you can see the trick is there. And then up in the corner, it says that something about legal tender. It's on the top left-hand side. I don't have a bill in front of me right now.
Well, it says this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. That's the law. That's the only reason this is good currency is you have to take it.
Correct. Well, you don't have to take it. The government and banks have to take it.
Well, I thought if you had like a business that accepted money, you had to accept this money as well.
That's what I thought too. And I do not think that's the case. So if a private business and a private business want to trade in something else, like, I don't know, Bitcoin, that is allowed.
Okay. But would that be allowed to the exception of not accepting bills,
I think so, because there doesn't seem to be anything in law, and at least not that I've found.
I know some websites that take Bitcoin only, so.
Yeah, and there doesn't seem to be anything in law that tells private businesses that you have to take this, but the government does, and the banks obviously do, but it's a government thing. Like, you have to be able to pay your taxes with those Federal Reserve notes. The government has to take them.
Well, since you brought up this subject of Bitcoin, I'm going to take this opportunity to use that segue, to make a segue and say I want to make sure everyone listening knows about BITBLOCKBOOM, the real Bitcoin conference that's coming to Dallas, Texas. And I say the real Bitcoin conference because that's all we talk about at BITBLOCKBOOM is Bitcoin. No altcoins, not blockchain, just Bitcoin. The third BITBLOCKBOOM conference is going to be in Dallas again for the third time. It's scheduled for August 2020. We're going to have a ton of great speakers. It's now almost a 4-day event with all the functions that are going on. So go to bitblockboom.com, look at the lineup of speakers, which are already starting to get there. And if you decide to go, well, tickets go up every 2 weeks, so they're not going to get any cheaper. And if you use the code COUSINS, COUSINS, you'll save 30% off your ticket at checkout. The first two BITBLOCKBOOMs were fantastic, and this one is definitely going to be our best one yet. So I hope I get to see you in Dallas at BITBLOCKBOOM. And I'm trying to talk Jennifer into coming to BITBLOCKBOOM because she has got a wealth of information that Bitcoin maximalists would love to hear and love to talk to you about. So we're going to try to make that work. So wanted to get that in real quick. But and I'm sorry to interrupt you, but you just got me on that. That was a good time to do that.
No, it's perfect.
Let's get back to the Fed, though, because I don't want to spend everybody who listens to this on a regular message knows about BITBLOCKBOOM. So let's get back to the Fed and to the money and everything like this. Right now, and I know you said you don't know a lot about this, but they're still pumping in money into the repo market. So it's still like quantitative easing, going on right now with the amount of money they're pumping into that.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same game, but with different names. So whether they call it quantitative easing or whether they say they're propping up the repo markets, what they're doing is they're giving the banks money by expanding our money supply. And so the week that I was recording the Federal Reserve episode was the week that basically they pumped over $100 billion into the system. And since then, that number has inflated to $330 billion. And it was supposed to be these short-term loans. They're now being extended into mid-November. So now it's 2 months when it was supposed to be a matter of days. And this is how this goes. Quantitative easing was just supposed to be 2008 just to stop the bleeding. It went on for a decade. But basically, the way that it works is that you have IOUs, so securities, bonds, get printed by the government. So that expands the government debt. And in return for that, the Federal Reserve is able to issue money. And so when they say that they're buying securities, they're really just printing money because those securities are IOUs. And so that's what's happening again. And so you just kind of have to understand what they're doing. When they're buying securities, they're expanding the money supply, or excuse me, when they're selling, they're expanding the money supply. And then when they're buying, they're taking money out.
Well, how often do they buy? How often
Not that often lately.
Yeah, that's what I was getting at. Another thing you said a moment ago, which I'm going to go to another reference on it, was about the inflation. I was watching, I don't know who it was and what it was on a news show or something, one of the people from the Fed talking within the last month, and he was talking about how great it was that they were at their projected point that they were happy at because they had inflation at 2%. Yeah, and I'm kind of going, 2%? I just lost $2 out of every 100, and you're happy about that.
Yeah, that's their goal, is a 2% inflation. I'm sorry, I got it backwards. When the Federal Reserve is buying, they're issuing the cash. And when they're selling, it takes the cash out of the money supply.
Which they don't sell much.
No, they don't. Not lately. And like you said, their goal is a 2% inflation, which
so when
means
is it when it's bad? I mean, what? I mean, if they're happy with 2, I mean.
And it's also, that number is a lie. That's another thing that really bothers me, is that there's certain things that they don't count as inflation, specifically food and energy.
Well, those are 2 big items.
Those are very big items. And so when they tell you that inflation is around 2%, you have to keep in mind that they're not counting those 2 very important measures. And what that means for us is that our bank account is going down by whatever that, I mean, it's 2% or more, because we know that it's more if you count food and energy. But so if you just have your money parked in your checking account, it's going down because of what the Federal Reserve is doing. That's why inflation matters.
Well, when I was a kid, we used to, at 16, I'm 65 now, so this was a while ago, 40, 50 years ago. When we go out at night, we'd cruise in our cars all night long, but then again, when we ran out of gas, we'd pull up to a gas station and someone would go, hey, the person driving would go, everybody give me some money. And someone would go, oh, I got 30 cents. And someone else would go, I got 60 cents. Oh, I got 15 cents. And we pull it all together, fill up the car, and we could drive around for 4 or 5 hours. Now, that would get you 1 gallon of gas.
If that, yeah.
Yeah, and then they don't count that in the inflation level, which, like I said, that's a big deal. It's gone from maybe, I'm going to guess it was around 20 cents a gallon when I was a kid to, I saw in California today, it's $4.50 a gallon.
Even when I was a kid, I say in the episode, I remember in around 1998, 1999, I was paying 97 cents a gallon in California. And now we're paying over $4, and this is just the new normal.
When I was a kid, I would come home with a candy bar, and my dad would go, and I'd pay a nickel for this candy bar, Almond Joy or whatever. I never ate Almond Joys, but Milky Way or whatever. My dad would go, when I was a kid, I could get that same candy bar for a nickel, but it was 4 times that size.
Yeah.
Well, now they're small, like I had them again, but they're $2.
Yeah.
And no one thinks anything of it. Or a Coke used to be 6 cents. When I was a kid. Now, our movie ticket was 35 cents. These things are just eating our money up. You got to make more money just to keep up with what they're doing to our money.
Absolutely. And think about that inflation rate. It's not 2%. If you go from a nickel to $2, that's not 2%. That's over the course of your lifetime, and you're not that old. So
take those same mathematics, Jennifer. This is what I tell people all the time. If you take that, I saw a Coke go from 6 cents to $2. If you take that same mathematics, what would that make a Coke in another 50 years? $100? I mean, if you use the same multiplier, I can't do that in my head real quick, but I mean, can you imagine walking into a 7-Eleven and giving them a $100 bill to get a Coke?
Yeah.
But that could possibly be. That's possibly what's going to happen.
To the point that we're having conversations about getting rid of, the penny and the nickel, because what can you buy with those anymore? So it's like they're already talking about how they have to change the currency itself.
Don't get me talking on this penny and nickel and change stuff. Do you realize? I'm one of those people. My dad was a hardworking manual labor, and we didn't have much money growing up. We really didn't. And nothing against manual laborers. He just was a hardworking man who didn't make a lot of money. And luckily, I'm in a situation where I'm not. But his big thing growing up that he always taught us was to walk with your head down because all the money was laying on the ground. There wasn't any floating up in the air. So no walk around with your nose up in the air because all the money's on the ground. And he found money all the time. He'd find $20 bills, $10 bills. He always found money. We'd be walking down the street and he'd pick up a $5 bill. Well, now, when it comes to change, if you walk around looking at the ground, you'll find change everywhere you go. My office is in a poor side of town, and I find 25, 35 cents every day just in the parking lot walking around. It sounds like nothing, but believe me, when I was a kid, you didn't see that often. You know, you might find something that fell out of someone's pocket, but it's almost like people are throwing it away because they don't want it.
Yeah. Because
there's piles of it when I find it. I'll find it and there's 8 cents over here, not just a penny, or there's 35 cents over here. It's kind of weird. I'm even picking it up, but I guess because I'm old, I still pick up money when I see it on the ground.
I still do the same thing, and it'll add up eventually, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I know that sometimes if I'm wearing an outfit that doesn't have pockets and I have to get change for whatever reason, I live in the Bay Area, so there's homeless people everywhere, and I give away the change because it's like I don't want to carry it, and it doesn't have that much value anymore.
Right. And I think people are just dropping it when they go to go, I don't want this, and they just drop it on the ground. So what do you think will inevitably happen to us peons due to the Fed? I mean, what is the target? We got the SDR. Was it SDR you were talking about? We got a lot of stuff going on here. They're taking our money. I mean, what's going on here? What do we see as an end game?
So keeping in mind that this is all crystal ball and I don't really know.
Right. You haven't been to the future, you're telling me?
I have not. I hope I get to go someday.
I thought you were with Marty McFly. And
but basically, I think that the dollar's days as the reserve currency are numbered. So I think the United States is not going to have this position of power that we've had, in large part due to the financial crisis. There are a lot of countries that don't trust us anymore and are creating international organizations that we're not a part of. And so I don't think that the dollar is going to have the position that it has right now. I don't know if the SDR is what's going to replace it, but what I do know is that these central bankers are in it together. Unless there is a global movement, which there might be, to stop this whole fiat currency game, I think we're going to end up seeing our cost of living just go up and up and up and up and up, and our standard of living goes down until we collectively do something about it. And what that looks like,
do you think that President Trump using money and our power in the financial arena as a weapon would have more of a chance of hurting the U.S. instead of helping it in the long term? Because people will go,
yes,
I'm tired of having this money being weaponized. I'm going to get out of this deal.
I think it's already happening. Yeah, there's a book. It was a Collusion by Nomi Prince. That's the word. Oh, and okay, yeah. So it was Danielle DiMartino Booth. She was the one that worked inside of the Fed for 10 years. She was the person that said the government sacks thing. It was Nomi Prince who wrote a book about all the central bankers working together, and it's very recent. I think it came out maybe 6 months ago, and so it was during the Trump years. And it is an absolute fact that what we have done by making someone like Donald Trump, who I don't care which party you're in, this is someone who governs impulsively. Let's just say that. And he is using our money as a weapon. He's using our political power as a weapon. He's only accelerating the process of the dollar not being the number one currency anymore, and of our country not being trusted, because we were the ones creating this global system. The International Monetary Fund and the United Nations, those are headquartered in Washington, D.C. So it was always a U.S.-based system. And what happened was other countries got economically damaged because of our negligence to police our banking system, which is a global banking system. And so it made these other countries go, wait, we can't let the United States be in charge. And then right after that happens, we entrust our country to Donald Trump, who I don't even know if he understands what he's doing, but whether or not he does, the perception is that he doesn't. And it just showed the world that we can't trust one country to control this whole thing. And so other countries, specifically China and Russia, are partnering in a lot of different ways. and with a lot of different countries. I mean, China's doing something so brilliant, which is that while we are starting wars around the world, they're building roads. They call it the Belt and Road Initiative. And so other countries are welcoming them in and taking loans from their.
Well, there was a time we used to do that.
Absolutely. And there was a time that the International Monetary Fund and the United Nations were trusted, and those were the institutions where countries would go to for loans. Now they're going to China because China isn't killing as many people as we are.
Well, now China is the economic hitman, that the United States used to be.
Absolutely. Well, we're playing the same game. We're still doing that, but China is using our playbook to play economic hitman around the world, but doing it in a peaceful, we're going to build things kind of way. Yeah, I just think that our global power, I think we're on the way down, and I think there's very few people that would disagree with me on that at this point. And I don't know what that's going to look like for us. I really don't.
I think that's why a lot of people are hodling Bitcoin, because they agree with you 100%, and they see Bitcoin as their hedge, and they feel that the rest of the world will catch up and realize that soon, and that's when it'll skyrocket, not necessarily because the Bitcoin is going up, more so because the dollar is going down, is the belief there.
It's a hedge, and I think that's all we can do right now is hedge our bets. And so I have Bitcoin.
No, you accept, and just let everybody know, Jennifer accepts Bitcoin and some other shit coins on her website.
I do, but if someone wants to give me a shit coin, I'll take it because I'm hedging my bets.
Yeah. So she does accept Bitcoin, though. So if you listen to her show and you like her, feel free to leave her a tip. She'll accept it kindly.
Yeah, the podcast is listener supported because, like I said, I think one of the biggest problems we have is that we're not being told this stuff by a media that is a part of that system and is funded by those banks and by the war companies. And I mean, anytime you watch television, watch the commercials because those are the companies that are funding your news. And I don't want to participate because I want to be able to say things like this if I believe them to be true.
And like I said, I listened to your podcast twice because I just found the information so amazing. And I think your show, I'm a subscriber now. So I think you should have picked up some more subscribers here from Bitcoin Maximalists because you're putting out the kind of information they want to know. Before we get out of here, because I try to keep these at a half an hour and we're into 40 minutes. So that's pretty good for me, only to be 10 minutes over my time period. Last week, I think I was an hour. How can people follow you? Where can people follow you at? We know that to subscribe, they just can go to, I guess, wherever they're listening to this, they can just search Congressional Dish. What's your website? Where can they follow you at? Give people all the scoop here.
Well, yeah, the website's congressionaldish.com, and I'm glad you brought that up because that's where I give everyone my sources. I don't expect anyone to trust a word I say. And so the most important thing that I do is every article I read, every hearing that I feature, because I play a lot of sound clips from Congress, I'll give you the timestamps and the transcripts of those clips so you can see them yourself in context. I think it's very important for people to understand where the information is coming from. And so that's all available on congressionaldish.com. But the podcast itself is on Spotify, Pandora, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. It's everywhere podcasts can be found. And I can be found on Instagram and Twitter at Jen Briney. Those are my two favorites.
Now, here's some questions I like to ask everybody. What is your favorite podcast? What podcast do you listen to? That'd be favorite. What do you listen to?
I love the Joe Rogan Experience and have been listening to him for as long as his podcast has existed. I love his conversations. I love that he'll talk to people from every political standpoint and comedians. And I just that's my favorite one. That's if I'm running, if I'm doing something, that's probably what I'm listening to.
And do you accept crypto? What do you do with your crypto when you accept it? What wallet do you use?
Coinbase.
Excuse me?
Which I know, like, I have it in Coinbase. And so now I don't know. That's the thing. I'm not going to pretend to be someone that's all that knowledgeable.
Well, that's a question I ask people. There you go. You're the first one to answer me that. We know you're not a crypto person, so we're going to let you slide. But you need to do something there, girl. I'm telling you right now.
Yeah, but I don't even understand what that something would be. So I think that's, and as the crypto community, I think
you're probably going to have a lot of tweets now. People giving you options.
Yeah, and I have, but I think that's one of the barriers that Bitcoin and all cryptos are going to have to overcome, which is that this is still too complicated for me to explain to myself, never mind my mom and dad.
I think everybody in the crypto world agrees with you on that, but so was the internet when it first came out.
Of course.
Yeah,
And I know
so-
it's something that will overcome, and I know everybody's working on getting the language to the point that it is simple enough. But I found that understanding the Federal Reserve was so much easier than understanding Bitcoin.
But you do realize that if they wanted to stop Bitcoin from being used, what they would do would be shut down all the exchanges, which is where your money's at.
Yeah.
Because they couldn't shut down Bitcoin, but they could shut down the exchanges. And so you're not hedging. You really wouldn't be hedging your bets. You would be going, gosh, what did I do? So you need to figure that out. So I appreciate you coming on the show. Sorry to ended up giving you a hard time there.
But I'm aware that I'm not doing the wise things.
Okay. Well, I just wanted to make sure and help you out there. Yeah, I don't listen to the Joe Rogan podcast. I catch it occasionally. I'm watching YouTube and it'll come on and I'll see a person on there that's of interest. You like that a lot, huh?
I really do. I do. I like the comedians he's friends with, and I love when he talks to people that he just asks really good questions and he's a good listener. So when he gets down more the intellectual guests, I mean, I just eat them up. I think they're so good and his audience is so big, and there are things that he personally has exposed the world to that they wouldn't even know about. Like he's talked to Tulsi Gabbard a few times, and I've always loved their conversations because she has a different perspective on our war in Syria, like why we're there. She's actually physically been there. And I just love that there's so many people my age that are listening to him and getting information that they're not getting on the news, but they should be in a format that's easy to listen to. And he fact checks too. He has Jamie sitting there fact checking everything. And I really appreciate that. He's very careful to not spread nonsense. And it was one of the reasons why I was like, okay, this is something I need to emulate. I need to make sure people have my sources because Joe's doing something right. So I just think he's a very important leader in our industry and I admire him and I like what he does.
I was speaking at a podcast event maybe 8 months ago in Austin, I think. And one of the girls who were ladies, whatever, that were putting it on, that was involved with putting it on, while she was talking and during the event, she had a panel or something, and she was saying, I hate Joe Rogan, and I dislike anyone who listens to his show.
Wow.
And I was like, I've not watched a lot of his shows, in my case, watching, because I watch on YouTube, and I was like confused. What was it that she disliked about him so much? And I'm still kind of confused on that.
There's a segment of the female population that can't really handle some of his thoughts on male-female relations.
Okay, well, I guess I haven't seen those episodes.
Well, no, it's not that I'm not offended by anything he says because he's more pointing out the differences instead of saying anything negative. I mean, he has a wife that he loves more than anything and 2 daughters. So he's not a misogynist. But like, for example, one of the things that makes him crazy is trans rights in sports. And his perspective that he's taken a lot of flack for is if you were a man and then you go into women's boxing, you are at a natural advantage because men are physically stronger in the upper body than women. Mm-hmm. And so it's not fair to do. And so he'll say things like that are controversial.
I don't think that's
true.
That controversial. I mean, it's kind of like anatomy.
I'm with you, but there's a lot of people that react to things that he says where I don't think that they really listen. And then he's also, it's not that he's supportive of the Me Too movement, but there's a line, and some of his personal friends have been damaged by accusations.
I probably haven't listened to enough to know this information because I just was confused when she said she hated him and disliked anyone had anything to do. I was like, what did the guy do? I've only seen like 5 episodes, but every time he's been just talking about something to do with a host or money or something interesting. I'd never seen him do anything that.
Yeah, I've run into this too with some females. Some women are a little reactionary to anything that sounds negative to them. And I think she's wrong in just straight up hating him. And especially the part where like, I won't listen to anyone else who likes him. I mean, that's exactly the type of attitude that gets us in trouble as a society to be like, well, I don't like something you said, so I hate you and everyone who likes you. Like, that's the most immature thing.
Yeah, I saw the generous. Did you see that on the news this morning about her and President Bush?
I'm on the West Coast. Oh, Ellen. Yeah, she's hanging out with a war criminal, but like she's in Gary Jones's box. Like, she can't control who else is there. What is she supposed to do? Punch him? Like,
yeah, right. I mean, I don't know. That was great. Well, now we're just talking, having a good time. So,
and you and I could talk for hours. We know that.
Yeah, we know that for sure. I finally had to go to the hotel room because we would have sat there another 2 hours in that bar talking. So thank you for coming on the show so much. And everybody, I'm telling you, go subscribe to her podcast. It's a great show. She gives you a lot of content, and you'll listen to your episodes a second time like I did. And you'll end up subscribing and loving her show, and leave her a tip. And if anyone wants to send her a wallet so she can save her money. I know some of you guys got an extra Treasure or Ledger, Nano X or something hanging around there. Send her one. Someone send her a wallet. Help a girl out.
On what to do with it, because like that's the part I don't understand.
Yeah, someone help a girl out there. Hey, thanks for coming on the show, Jennifer.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed today's show. A big thank you to all the cousins out there that are showing their support by donating, subscribing, and leaving great reviews on iTunes. All of those things help more than you realize. Now, you can subscribe almost anywhere podcasts are available by going to cryptocousins.com/subscribe. Call me with your comments or questions at 747-777-9471. Or you can email me at thecryptocousins@gmail.com, and I'll try to use these on future episodes. Please take a peek at the 4-Minute Crypto Show, which is produced every weekday and located at 4minutecrypto.com. It's the place to get your daily dose of crypto news, and as always, 4 minutes or less. And one last thing, please take a look at my new website, Crypto Crybaby. This website is for the true crypto fan and sells Bitcoin and crypto gear like t-shirts, caps, and so much more. Take a look at CryptoCrybaby.com today. Thanks again for listening. Love you guys.
Thanks for listening to the Crypto Cousins podcast. Please share the show with your friends. They can subscribe by going to cryptocousins.com/subscribe. And if you want to know more about Gary, just go to GaryLeland.com. Make sure and join Gary and all the Crypto Cousins every week for a new episode of the Crypto Cousins podcast. The Crypto Cousins podcast and the information included in the podcast are not intended as investment advice. Investing in any cryptocurrency is risky, and you should never invest more than you can afford to lose. Always seek professional advice before investing in any cryptocurrency. Please understand, you are using any and all information from the Crypto Cousins at your own risk.